Thanks for having me. Let me get this little thing started here, which is not going to be a series of work, like my own work. You can Google me if you're interested at all in what I do, because I can't really I don't mind talking about what I do, but I don't like to look at what I do. So instead, what we have here is, this is like, we'll give you something to look at so you don't have to look at me. And then it'll also give you a sense of time, I think, which is an important aspect to anyone who wants to do anything, is being able to gauge how much you can do in a half hour. So in a half hour, you guys are going to sit here, and you could have been doing what I'm doing there, or whatever you do. So what I'm going to talk about today is basically outline some points that I think are aspects of what I use to describe what I do as a graphic designer. So I am a graphic designer, but when I chose to be a graphic designer, I also chose to redefine what being a graphic designer is to me, kind of secretly. But I knew that when I grew up, I'll give you a brief outline of, I grew up in Canada. My mother was a teacher, my father was a lawyer. I grew up in the suburbs in Calgary, Alberta. And I always had a sense that, I think living in the suburbs, I had a sense that I could do whatever I wanted. Grew up skateboarding, and I had a lot of opportunities. But at the same time, I think I also inferred that I also had to have a job. So I like to draw, and I like to make things, so I decided I would have a job where I got to draw all the time. So I had to find out what that job was. And I also felt like I had to go to school. I had to go to college. So I had to find something I could learn in school and draw the entire time I was in school, so I could get a job drawing all the time. And I discovered there was commercial art or graphic design. So I went to a local art college called the Alberta College of Art. And it was like a very vague program where you, not vague, but I guess broad program of commercial art where you do illustration and graphics. And I was really good at the illustration part of it and the drawing, and then I struggled with the graphics, kind of in the typography. But it was really the graphics that interested me. By the time I was in my fourth year of school, I was already working for companies in California doing snowboards and skateboards, and I was really keenly aware of what I was good at. But I was also aware that if, like at 22 years old, if I already had a career and was doing something, that there was no way I could sustain that it wasn't really going to go anywhere. So I knew that I needed an aspect of challenge, and what interested me still was the design. So I focused kind of on what I wasn't good at, which is graphics, and I went to CalArts, the California Institute of Arts in Los Angeles. I applied and surprisingly got in with not a lot of design work in my portfolio. And at that point, just stopped drawing. So for 2 years in that program, I didn't draw. I just threw myself into making like really ugly work and struggling with kind of reinventing myself and learning a new way of thinking that I could apply, hopefully, to my career I've chosen myself, which is a graphic designer. What I did learn while I was there, though, was a conceptual approach to doing graphic design. I studied under Lorraine Wild and Ed Fella and Jeff Keaty, who were designers at that time who were kind of in the process of redefining what graphic design was at the time. And that was kind of like the time of like ray gun work and stuff that maybe you'd be familiar with, that was at its heart were people striving to kind of make design better and to improve, kind of improve on what design was. But for me, I just kind of learned the process. And the minute I graduated, I just started drawing again. I was always drawing in my sketchbooks, but basically I graduated, I had gone through this big, long process, and then immediately started doing skateboards again. So it was kind of interesting. But I had really changed a lot in those 2 years. And I found that I had this it became very clear that I had this like binary system of the things I knew and the things that I learned. And it was just about applying these two things, applying what I was good at to kind of solve the struggles, the things to solve the problems that I was presented and the things I wanted to learn. So it's not like I was ignoring my skills. It was just using my skills as a kind of like a bridge to learning new things and pushing myself and improving on what I was doing, which I kind of came upon this by accident, really. So Harry Houdini called himself a magician. And if you went to see Harry Houdini, you would expect something to happen that was magic. But what Harry Houdini seemed to really be interested in was tying himself up in chains and lighting himself on fire and eating fire and doing like really crazy stuff. But he called it magic. And I think you could expect to be challenged at a Harry Houdini show. And the challenge was to be watching something that didn't exactly make sense to you. You would be surprised by some event. And you would ask yourself, well, how did he do that? Which was kind of the point of the performance. And then you would answer yourself with, it's magic. And I think that part of that was because Harry Houdini called himself a magician. So a big part of who he was about how he defined himself. For me, like right now, if I cut off my hand, it only becomes magic when I reattach it. And the beauty of the magic would be to reattach it perfectly, not with stitches or in any sort of messy way. Like the beauty of the magic would come out of that the severing of the hand was totally horrific, but that the hand being reattached was perfect and beautiful. And I think that for me in graphics, it's the same way. I think that you want to present yourself as if you're being with a kind of clarity, and that what you're doing, it's very evident what you're doing, where you're taking somebody, the message you're giving, and that the solution has an equal clarity, and that there is this polarity going on, that you are posing the question and answering it in a very clear way. And for me, a lot of that is calling it graphics. For me, by calling what I do graphic design, it gives people the ability to look at what I'm doing and read it more like a sentence rather than an image that is entertaining. I think we understand that graphics are about explaining things or understanding things better. That with graphics, you can things can take you somewhere. In some ways, I think it's the difference between like the skull and then the skull playing stand-up bass. That is what like graphics can do. I think very often, it's like as a kid, I think I started off drawing skulls, and that I think in the end, I wanted to do something that's maybe a little more transcendental, but I still wanted to draw skulls. But I think it's that, with magic, it kind of pretends to be clear. Like magicians are always like showing you, like, look, I'm totally not tricking you. I have nothing up my sleeve. And the whole act is about that clarity. And I think that with design, it does the same thing. It's like very much, I'm always pretending to be very clear and simplifying things and saying, well, this is what I'm talking about. This is if it's for a client, I want it to be evident, like this is what we're trying to express to you. And then it seems I think it makes it seem clever when I go, and this is how I did it. This is what I came up with, this single image, this thing. And so the person viewing the graphic becomes a participant in the process, and the process itself becomes clear. And so that in the end you can go like, oh, that's so clever, because you knew the question. The other thing about calling what I do graphic design and choosing to be a graphic designer was that it's also offering up what I do as a commodity, because graphic design is sold, and you hire graphic designers. So it means I had a job, which I kind of just assumed I needed a job. And it also is a way to guarantee what you're doing is relevant to the world, that you are going to participate actively with the people around you. They're going to seek you out. They need you. They can hire you to do things. And you can really interact. Like for me, for me, getting offered jobs is exciting because it means you're going to meet people and you're going to hear their ideas and you're going to learn from them. And for me, I always knew I needed that. And that, I think it's like early on, I was interested in snowboarding and my friends were snowboarders. So I made boards. When they became pros, I made boards for them. But then I saw that through that, I got to meet people who had snowboard companies. And you talk to them and you realize, oh, they need to know people like me. And for me, it's really interesting to meet people like you. And, I think that with companies, I think it's like I found that they often, it's like they're like creatures with no head. That they, at first when they would come to me, I would be like, this is such a great opportunity. I'm so lucky to get to work with this big company. And then I realized it's because they have no ideas, they have no thoughts. They have like a plan and a mission and deadlines and things to do, but there isn't like a singular being or brain operating the entire thing. It's just not possible. And so that my solutions are always coming from me, my one idea. And that's exactly the type of thing they don't have. And so obviously that's why they are seeking people out all the time. I had probably around the year 2000, I was doing a lot of work in film. So I started doing titles for Friends films. So I did titles to skateboard movies that were directed by Spike Jonze. And then he went on to make feature films. And I did the titles to Virgin Suicides by Sofia Coppola. And those were great experiences. And so from that, I thought, I like to do titles design. So I started to pursue doing titles in Hollywood. So I met producers and they would hire me based on work I would do, and I started to work. And it was kind of a big failure, really. I spent 2 years kind of pursuing this work until I realized what I was getting involved in was the studio system, which is kind of a cliche. And it's like in Hollywood, the way things work is the studio system. There are studios and they hire, production houses, and production houses hire people, and there's this big system that works. And they're kind of like, they have no heads. They're kind of like companies with no heads. The reason that things kind of fell apart for me in pursuing this work is I saw that I was just an individual. That it wasn't personal when the projects would kind of fall apart or people would treat me badly. It's because I was operating in a way that didn't fit with their system. That I was just, as one person, I would show up to the shoot and I was me, or I would show up to deliver things and I wouldn't have my assistant deliver things. I would just walk and deliver them. And it kind of upset the whole balance of the way things worked. And I just basically abandoned it and I stopped pursuing that type of work. And what I could have done was started a studio. And I could have hired people and built it up, and I could have had a whole business of being an animation production house or a design house that produced these things, and then I could have worked with them and it been a studio. And then I would have been a person who runs a studio. And I would have had a midlife crisis by now, because you see where that goes, you suddenly become a studio runner. And I think that over the years now, I do film titles, and what I do is I work for directors directly. And I think the lesson that I learned from that is that it wasn't important to change the system. It wasn't important to spend the energy to redefine how Hollywood works, or to start a company that was going to change it all. And I'm going to, do this. I'm going to take this work, but I'm going to do it my way. And I'm not going to be a studio runner because I'm creative, and I'm never going to find myself in that position. I will always be a graphic designer, and I'll be a hands-on studio runner. I didn't redefine the way a company works. I just chose to just decide that was a dead end. And I think that, I'm glad I did, because it's in reality, like, the position as an individual, the best position to be in is the position of the director, the person, the head. You don't want to be the corporation. Or if you are the corporation, you want to act like the director. Because in Hollywood, it's the directors that are going to make change. It's directors who have the ideas, and if you want something made, go to the director, don't go to the studio. And I think that that was like a valuable lesson, that there is a fluidity to being a single person that gives you the ability to make a lot of change within a culture that is filled with systems and companies and big companies and small companies, or whatever the case is. And that is like a very effective way to make change. I can basically have a phone conversation with a director, and that can affect what we do, you know, rather than if you have a company and you would have to make like a bunch of broad moves. So when an inventor goes to the patent office, or whoever does this, so like the Department of Patents, and presents his invention, he does it in the form of, sometimes they make those little models, or the thing I think of is they do a drawing. So they do this drawing, and it says, this is my invention. And hopefully that invention is some very clever solution to a common problem. And then the people at the Board of Patents, the person looks at that and they think, okay, this thing is rad. This thing is a great invention. In fact, it's so rad, we think that someone's going to copy it. So we are going to give you a patent. And within that drawing, it has to be so clear to that person that this is an original idea solving a problem that I understand, that it can receive this patent. And I think with graphic design, basically the process stops there. You just do the drawing. And instead of going and making the thing or presenting it to the patent office, you print it and you present it to the world. And the world looks at your thing and they go, I see what he's doing. That's rad. And converse to patent, then if it's successful, then people copy it. Or they just enjoy it and they adopt it as part of their world, and it solved the problem. And I think what's interesting about the idea of comparing design to invention is that, like with invention, what you need are common problems. You need to be talking about, you can do an invention for something, like if you're an astronaut and you invent a bunch of tools that are like solving the everyday problems of astronauts, it's not going to be very effective. What you need as an inventor is you need to have common problems. And I think as a designer, I like to think of myself as, you know, the work I do as addressing these very simplistic ideas. But in reality, what they are common problems that I'm inventing in the realm that we can hopefully all understand to some degree. It's some place, you know, I think often when people look at my work, it's almost like I describe what I do as like cliches you've never heard before, that it's like, that feels like I thought of that before, but I haven't, or it's like playing with language, and it's playing with our problems and issues around us in a way that is, you know, I think kind of, I'm preying on that kind of familiarity. And I think, like, you know, the best inventors have maybe not the biggest problems. I think if your problems are too big, maybe you can't get anything done, but you have problems that everybody has. And I think that helps. And it's kind of like, you know, it's kind of the same as magic. You know, you're revealing, part of an invention is you're revealing the process. You're revealing what you're doing. You're saying, this is, you know, the apple peeler alludes to the apple that you peeled by hand. In seeing an apple peeler, you understand that you like a peeled apple is a nice thing. When I was at Cal Arts, I think it was, you know, I saw a lot of great designers, and in their design, when you sit in a critique, they would talk about their projects, and they would have all these amazing ideas that they'd like hidden in the graphics, and they would talk about it, and I think that is so great, that's so smart. But it's almost like that they were buried in the semiotic gestures of these posters, and that the first thing I thought of is just like chaos, but then when they talk about it, there's all this great stuff going on. And I think that that's when I went to do work, I kind of was thinking about those great ideas and the process of how the way designers I was working with at CalArts were putting that into their work, but instead just trying to get everything away and make it totally clear, to totally reveal that process, to reveal that that the steps that got me to that point. Now, I think I'm going to read a poem. Please come in my office. Close the door behind you. You can finish your work as soon as we're through. I don't mean to pry or make you feel strange, but people are talking and things have to change. Your work has been suffering. You don't return mail. Your clothes are a mess and you're looking quite pale. We are all flesh and blood. We know it's not easy, but yours is starting to show and it's making us queasy. We've been over this before. I know you're doing your best, but you still have blood shooting out of a hole in your chest. I feel bad complaining. I know you must be stressed, but your blood spilling everywhere is making me depressed. To be honest, your performance is not the issue anymore. It's the giant pools of blood that are ruining the floor. Okay, that's our poetry break. I like writing poems. I don't particularly like reading poems, but I couldn't really have you read it. Because the reason I like writing poems and I like people to read poems that I wrote is I think of poems. I started writing poems because I was thinking, what is the farthest extreme of graphics? If on one end there's kind of noisy work that is hard to understand, that at the other end there's like this kind of clarity that is just kind of pure language. And I was using, in my work I use words and things with images, and I thought, what if I just take all the graphics out? It's kind of the ultimate graphics, just words addressing some point. So I can draw a guy sitting here in a chair in an office, or I can write a poem about a guy in an office who's bleeding out of his chest. And so it was an exercise in taking ideas in in graphics, but just doing them with words, only words. Because the thing about graphics is sometimes it's frustrating that you can struggle. You might have an idea and you can struggle. I will struggle to do it with graphics. And it becomes, it's like, it's an exercise, and I create exercises for myself, but sometimes it's a little much. And so it's kind of like a break to present something with words. And what I think is interesting about poetry is you don't, as a visual artist, is with poetry, you don't invent words. You don't sit down or like when a kid does a poem, it might be like moon, shmoon, or like sunset, shmunset would be a rhyme. So, and when I'm talking about poetry, I'm really talking about rhymes. That's all that interests me, is words that rhyme, telling a story or something. Like poetry that doesn't rhyme, I don't know where I would start or stop. I don't know how you do that, because to me, poetry, the thing that propels it forward is thinking of a word that rhymes, and that's what the story you're going to tell is because it rhymes, which is very much like graphics. Yeah, so you don't invent words as you write a poem. You use existing words. Like the words, it's like junk art or ready-mades, that you're taking things and making something like a horse out of car parts or something. And I think I really like that. I think in my work, I create constraints for myself. I create these exercises, and these kind of parameters within I'm going to work. And the minute I did that, the minute I started choosing, the first day I started CalArts and I chose not to draw, or when I finished CalArts and I started to work and I chose to pare my work down into like simple, like a one-liner that could be read from anybody standing 10 feet away from it. Or when I chose to take the work I was doing in my artwork and do that for clients. These parameters are what propelled me forward. It was not the opportunities. I think we can all make anything, you know, you have that choice, but it's really about, you know, we don't live in a vacuum, and we have to apply the world around us, our friends, our interests, our problems to what we do, and that gives us something to make, to do. And I think I'm almost done my drawing. I think I just needed to do some shading here, and I think that's it. Thanks a lot.